Hi, everyone. I'm Aimee Peterson. Welcome to the Ministry Wives Podcast, a production of the North American Mission Board. Here, we have honest conversations about the realities of the ministry wife life and how to keep our hearts tethered to Jesus as we serve Him. Today, I'm so excited about my conversation with Aimee Joseph. She is a church planting wife in California with 3 sons, and you may remember her on a previous podcast with Christine called Knowing What Needs Are Yours to Meet. Well, on this episode, we talk about ways to manage chaotic family life in a ministry family. It's so easy to get swallowed up in the chaos, especially when it seems like life will never slow down. And really, Aimee shares some great practical ways that she can enjoy the crazy chaos of her life. So join me, friends, in my conversation with Aimee. Welcome, Aimee. I'm so glad you're here on this episode today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be with you.
Well, I've been really looking forward to our conversation. And you previously were on this podcast with Christine on an episode entitled Knowing What Needs Are Yours to Meet. And I was listening to it on a walk in my neighborhood, and I wish I had had a pen with me because I was actually repeating some of the things that you were saying out loud, hoping that I would remember them. But then when I got home, of course I didn't, so I had to listen to it again. So for those of you who are listening, if you haven't listened to Aimee's conversation with Christine previously, we'll have it linked in our show notes, and you can listen to it there. It really helped me begin to cut through feeling like I have to do it all. And I think that's what a lot of us ministry wives feel. Well, you have a book called Demystifying Decision Making, a Practical Guide. And then you have a new book that's releasing in September.
I do. It is a Colossians study. So it's like a interactive workbook through New Growth Press, and it's called You Are Secure, Devotions for When Life Feels Uncertain. So yeah, digging into the reality of security in Christ and how the same truths that the Colossian church needed to hear thousands of years ago are the same truths that we need to hear today.
That is so true. Sometimes we think our issues are just new and current, but it has historically been happening from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
So I
Yep.
love that. I'm excited for that to come out. I love the letters of Paul, and Colossians is one of those that is so good.
So rich.
Yes, so rich. And so we'll have links to those also in our show notes. Listeners, if you want to touch base with those and continue really having conversations with Aimee through the ways that she's written the truths that the Lord has laid on her heart in her books. But for our conversation today, I wanted to kind of stay in the same lane that you spoke with Christine on the episode, but drill down a little further and speak to the overwhelmed and overdone ministry wife. How many of those are out there listening? And just really hoping to offer encouragement and advice on how to manage the chaos of family and ministry life without letting it manage us. So, how
Mm.
does that subject land on your heart today?
Well, I think you picked, if you're looking for someone who understands overwhelm, struggles with anxiety, trying to manage the chaos and fullness that is um, ministry, a calling to ministry, because ministry is not a job, it's a calling. It's a calling that God has given our husbands and us to shepherd a flock. And that is full. That by itself is full. And in addition to that, to shepherding the hearts of the children that God has placed in our home, neighbors, neighborhoods, school systems that we're trying to love and serve. It is so full. In fact, Aimee, I stopped saying busy. Um, I because people would ask, how are you doing? And the first thing that would come to my mind was busy. We're so busy. And it's true. We are a very busy culture and we're very busy people. And I think I tell people we have two teenagers, a tween, and a toddler church. And so I'm like, I'm covering the gamut here, and it's exhausting. It's full. So I've actually replaced the word busy with full.
Interesting.
Because it is a very full one. Is I think it gave me when I was using the word busy, it gave me this impression that one day we were going to get to a place where it wasn't busy. And it was always, well, once this is over, it'll be slow. And once this is over, it'll be slow. And it made me kind of long for the next thing rather than being present in the moment that God has given me. And so saying full has shifted it's reframing my perspective. I am very full. This season is very full, but it is full of good, God appointed things. And that's Psalm 16. So Psalm 16, you, O Lord, are my portion and my cup. You have assigned my lot. The boundary lines have fallen for me, my church, my flock, my children, my husband, in pleasant places. I have a delightful inheritance. And so instead of saying, this season is so busy and we're so overwhelmed, I've been saying, this season is full. Our schedule is full. Our lives are full. But love has ordained our lot. God's hands have ordained this for us. And so God's going to give us what we need to do this season well.
Aimee, that is so good. I'm really wrapping my head around that because I don't know how many times just this week I have said, it's so busy. I'm so busy. Or even with my girlfriends and those that I serve, it's just so busy. I don't know what to do. And that is an interesting word flip that honestly sets the context of your heart. It is full. I'm going to have to keep thinking about that and I'm going to try it out and see how that feels when people ask how I'm doing, just to say, life is full. That is so interesting. I just love that. And this carry it along with Psalm 16, which the boundary lines in pleasant places, I think is just so beautiful. So for those of you who are listening, try that out too. Say instead, I'm just so busy. Instead, say life is so full. And it is. And we could probably each write papers worth of all the tasks and all the responsibilities that we're doing and even compare them and realize that we have a lot of similarities in ministry life and in family life, but it can weigh us down if we don't start with a proper perspective of how we see it.
Yes. Well, and I would add, I had this moment probably 2 years ago where I was, you know, journaling and praying through processing for my children, my boys.
Mhm.
And I had this recognition that all of the things that I currently imagine or see as burdens that I was bringing before the Lord and praying for were actually answers to prayers that God had given. And so it just another shift of my perspective of, um, praying for their high school class selections or SATs that are coming up. We have teenagers and remembering back to 6 years ago when we were trying to figure out which public school was a good fit for our children and trusting the Lord to step into the public school system and trying to find a house in the right school district so we could get our kids an education that we felt comfortable with, without compromising our morals, and just remembering the agony of praying through that and then forgetting that the things that are burdens right now used to be the things that I was praying for. And so it's just again another perspective shift of complaining, not complaining, but having a moment where there's 12 teenage boys in my backyard, playing volleyball almost every night because we're in summertime, and having to go to the grocery store because we're out of LaCroix because they drink like 17 LaCroix halfway. And
It is everywhere. That is real life.
this is real life. And in the moment, kind of grumbling in my heart, I just bought 20 LaCroix or 30 LaCroix. How are they gone? And then and then that's where the Spirit catches me and I say, we prayed. We always prayed that we would be the house that kids would come to. And so,
Mm.
oh, far be it from me to complain that I have got to run back to the store when this is actually the thing that I asked God to give us, and He's giving it to me. And now I'm finding a way to complain about it and make it feel like it's a burden when it was the blessing that I begged Him for. Would you make our house the house where teenagers come? So it's for me, it's a reframing of perspective sometimes, and that doesn't take away the busyness and the stress completely, but it helps my heart and the way I approach
That's
it.
it is so true. And it helps me lean in to the Lord more versus stiff arm and try to do it on my own. And just
Absolutely.
that little flip of words helps me do that. So let's kind of create context for your life. You've given us good context. You've got teenage boys, you've got volleyball happening, you've got all the things. So tell us what your family looks like.
Yeah, my husband and I moved to California from South Carolina 12, almost 13 years ago to do college ministry on the West Coast, and brought our then 3 and 4 year old with us. And now we have 3 children, so we have one California baby, and our our boys have only known the context of ministry their whole lives, full-time ministry. But about probably 4 years ago, God was doing a ton in our neighborhood and in our school system, and friends were coming to know the Lord. And we were driving to a church that we adored, but it was about 40 minutes north of where we were, and just started to get a sense of, Lord, you're doing something in our neighborhood. And we just, Lord, someone needs to plant a church in our neighborhood. And we kept trying to recruit all our friends to come do it. And then my husband had this moment where he's like, I think we're supposed to do it. So we transitioned out of college ministry and planted a church in our neighborhood about 3 years ago. So 3 boys, aged 17, almost 16, and 11. So full.
Yes.
We are
That is
full.
a full spread of all sorts of things. So you are doing high school, which you've already mentioned, and ACTs, SATs, you're doing looking at colleges, but you're also working through driving for the first time. And
Mhm.
then you've got your 11-year-old who is coming into the middle school-ish era. And so is it 3 boys?
3 boys, yes.
Well, I have 3 boys too. I have a 22-year-old, a 19-year-old, and a 13-year-old.
Okay.
And so we've got kind of the spread as well. I'm on the top end with the other 2, the first 2, and still almost have entered a single child situation with the younger one. But I'm such a different parent than I was for the first, and it is just fascinating. And the context of our parenting changes and how that affects our ability and priorities in ministry, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was thinking about, um, I think it's important to recognize that in any season of parenting and ministry, there is going to be unique challenges and opportunities, blessings and burdens. And I think it's easy. I just remember in the younger years with parenting and ministry, which is not a problem to solve. This is another perspective shift for me. This is
Right.
not a problem I'm going to solve. This is a tension I'm going to manage for the rest of my life.
Okay, wait,
Um,
that is so good, Amy. This is
yes,
not a problem that I'm gonna solve. This
yes,
is a tension that I'm going to manage.
yes. Because when we, I think part of this is maybe it's just my personality, but or our culture, or the self help therapeutic culture kind of surrounding us. That if we could just find the magic bullet to balance, we're going to figure this out. If we could get the right book or the right podcast, which, sorry, newsflash, friends, we're not going to be that either, because there isn't a magic bullet. And I think that's
Yes.
that is another perspective shift of we're not going to find the thing that's the perfect balance.
Mhm.
One, it doesn't exist. And two, I don't think Jesus would want it to exist, because part of this, the whole thing of managing our time, managing our homes and our schedules, is really an invitation to be closer to Christ, to know him, to be made like him, to be conformed to his image. And it's not just a problem we're trying to fix, like insert right answer, like it's a chemistry equation that you can just balance out perfectly. And even if I didn't vocalize it, that's what I was looking for in the early years of parenting. I just want to get it right. I want to know how many hours to give to ministry, how many hours to say yes to things in our home, and how many hours to say no to things in our home. And it does change. Parenting and ministry changes. When they're little, I remember you're guessing and assessing needs all the time when they're little. Like, so and so, managing nap schedules. And okay, if we go to if my husband's got the elder meeting, if I stay home for that and then watch the kids, they can take a nap, and then after that we have community group. And you're just constantly guessing and assessing their needs when they're little, which is a good thing to do, and we have to keep doing it. But as they get older, you can actually ask them their needs, which is hard to do. I liked it better when I could just tell them, this is what you need and this is how we're going to do it. But as they get older, they actually have a voice and a will and an opinion. And so learning to stop and have check-in points where we say, hey, how are you doing? Like, this has been a really busy week. What do you think you need this weekend to thrive? And what do you need from us this weekend to thrive? This is what mom and dad need. These are a few set pieces in our schedule. But what is one thing you're looking forward to? And so I
Mm.
think it grows and changes. What does not change is that it is full and that there is a tension. And I think sometimes in our hearts we just want, I think there's a tendency to swing the pendulum. So it's either ministry is at the center, right? And or then, okay, no, it's not ministry, it's family at the center. And I have to push against both of those idols, because Christ is at the center. Christ is
Right.
at the center. That is Colossians 1:17, right? He is
Mhm.
before all things. In him, all things hold together. He is enthroned in the center of my life, not my children and their needs, not our church and its needs. Now, when Christ is at the center, there are going to be times where I say yes to my family and no to ministry. And I say, nope, we cannot do that. My children are overdone and they need space. And
Mhm.
we're not connected as a family. So we're going to say no to that. Or there are going to be times where I say no to my children and I say, no, we're having those people over. They're coming and we're going to be hospitable. Even though you're tired and you want to watch a show, we're going to not watch a show and we're going to engage and ask questions and be together as a family. And so you see how it's a yes to Jesus or a no to Jesus, not a yes to ministry or a no to family. It's another reframe, like Christ is at the center, not family, not ministry. And sometimes I'm going to disappoint. I'm going to disappoint both. Like I'm going
Yes.
to,
And
because
we're not
I'm
gonna get it right all the time.
no, and I'm going to say we're going to try as best we can to say yes to Christ, and recognizing that sometimes that looks like yes to our family and no to church, and or vice versa, um,
Mhm.
and
So
that
that's
helps.
Yeah, I love some of those questions that you ask your kids about what will help you thrive this weekend and engaging them in the conversation of family life and family management when they're at the place of their ages in which they can. And so I was just thinking about the ministry wife who's like, I've got all this church stuff to do. And often with church planning and with smaller sized churches, the ministry wife often is the one who holds it all. And so she's doing all these things, but yet she also sees her kids who need time with her. So to that ministry wife, in a nutshell, what would you tell her to, what would, if she came to you and said, Aimee, I've got to do all these stuff and I can't not do these,
Mm,
but yet I've got my family here and I know I need to be with them. I just don't have enough hours in the day. What
yeah.
would you say to her?
I would say, "Oh my goodness, girl, I feel you." Yes, I have been there. I'm there right now, probably. Um, a couple things. I think the first thing I would say, Edith Schaefer, she was the wife of just a great Christian thinker, Francis Schaeffer. They were an incredibly hospitable home. They opened up their home and their lives to honest seekers and doubters of the faith in France. They started a ministry called L'Abri. And so if anyone knows about people just showing up at your door, ministry needs, demands, and family, it's her. And she has this image and she says that the front door has hinges and a lock. It has
Mm,
hinges and a lock. And that helps me. That frees me that there are times when I'm going to hinge open our lives and I'm going to say, come in, or I'm leaving this house to go do the things that God has called me to do. And then there are times where I'm going to close that door and I'm going to lock it and I'm going to say, nope, this is a protected time. This is a protected time for our family. And a couple things like before we get to the practical things. One is in the midst of all the carrying, I think it's so important to remember that Christ carries us. Isaiah 46, 3 and 4. Listen to me, O house of Jacob, all the remnant of the house of Israel. You who have been born by me from before your birth, you've been carried from the womb. Even to your old age, I am he, and to gray hairs, I will carry you. I have made, I will bear, I will carry, I will save. I forget that every week because the needs of our church and our children feel overwhelming. And we're small. I can't imagine big churches. We're a small church and a small flock, and it's absolutely overwhelming. And I feel like without the scriptures in my own flesh, I will go, I have to make this work. I have to
mm,
figure it out. I have to carry. I have to bear and I have to save. And that's
mhm.
not true. What my flock and my children need is Christ. And what I need is Christ. In the midst of all of the carrying, he's carrying me. That's one thing.
Yes. There's such surrender in that, and there's such humility in that, because I think that we often get in the I don't know, the kind of the strut of I have to do it, there's no one else.
Mhm.
Um, I've already said yes, I can't say no. If I
Mhm.
don't do it, then I won't be a good ministry wife or I won't
Mhm.
be fulfilling my role if I don't do it. And sometimes it's pride.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's kind of like this inflated martyrdom of I've got to do it. I'm doing it for Jesus and at the expense of my own care as well as my family's care. So those are some of the challenges that I have even. Oh, and here's the other one. I do it to feed my own significance
Mhm.
because sometimes my church or my ministry will feed that faster and better then my family will.
Yep.
And I sometimes I look at my family and go, I'm just a failure all the way around. I didn't do this, I didn't do the laundry, I didn't do all these things. But oh my goodness, I use my ministry. And so I love what you said, that first part on Jesus centered.
Mm-hmm.
He's the one that carries. And I think that that's the starting point for all of us, to be
Yes.
real and honest, that what is the real motivation here of my heart?
Yes. Well, and I would say too, so a verse that I go back to, as a chunk of scripture I go back to probably weekly in this season of fullness with ministry and family is, and because of the same issues that you have that you were mentioning of just running to ministry, this is easy, it's significant, it's a quick grab, it's a slow cooker with teenagers. It's a different game. Is Acts 17. So um, Paul is talking to a group of people who are not believers, and he's trying to make connections to them, and they have an unknown God. And anyway, but this is what he says. He says, "The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth. He is not served by human hands as if he needed anything, for he himself gives to all men life and breath and all things." I have to
Mm,
go back to that every week. The God, Aimee, the God who made the world and everything in it is not served by your hands. He doesn't need you. Now, when I let that settle, he's giving you life and breath and all things. When I get that settled into my soul, about
mm,
20 minutes later, I can start going, okay, now, Lord, what are you inviting me to do with you? Right? Because there are
mm,
burdens to bear. And so I think, again, it's easy to kind of get into a pendulum of, okay, I tell people all the time in ministry, there's a pendulum of, or continuum. One side is unbounded. You're just meeting all the needs, and the other side is overly bounded, where
mm,
it's like you're super protected. And I have been in ministry seasons where I've been on either extreme. Right, I'm so burnt out. I'm moving towards burnout because I'm trying to do all the things, and because I'm not believing that Christ is the center, and I'm not taking the slowing down moment and having healthy rhythms of Sabbath rest and meeting with the Lord to be able to discern the thin line between good, better, best. And so I'm thinking everything is mine to do, and I'm headed towards burnout. And then what I would do when I'm headed towards burnout, I tend to then swing the pendulum to the other side and say, okay, I'm building really strong boundaries. And then I become overly bounded, and I'm almost afraid to say yes to the Lord. I'm almost afraid. So I'm really
mm,
protecting my nose really well. But then, and now I'm living within my own strength. I'm not believing that God can press me out of it. That God, there might be a need that feels too big for me, that God
mm,
is saying, I want you to walk with me, and I want to
mm,
show you what I'm about to do. Even though you're
mm,
exhausted and even though you have no time, this one's yours to pick up. You need to pick it up with me. And so there again, it's just easy to get stuck in either or. Okay, it's either this or this. And God
mhm,
says it's both. We don't want to be burnout, but we also don't want to be overly bounded. And to me, the way you live in the tension of the between those two is having healthy rhythms of rest and work. Regular.
mm.
So some of our weekly for our
Now what does that
families.
look like? I'm curious. Healthy rhythms of rest and work.
Yeah, I think
Yes.
our culture. So Eugene Peterson has fantabulous thoughts about rest and work, and he talks about in Genesis 1 and 2. It's Hebrew poetry, which we know, and
Mhm,
it's he's got God is showing off the beauty of two seemingly opposite things that complement each other. So
mm,
sky and sea, light
yes.
and dark, male and female, and he says the last of the complementary pairs that we tend to miss is work and rest. And so the first time we meet God, he's a worker. What's he doing? He's in his art studio creating the world with words. And so God is working. And the first thing in the scriptures that God calls holy is time. He calls time holy. He says rest. The Sabbath day is the first thing that he sets aside, which is just fascinating. And so Eugene Peterson's point is that a regular rhythm, they complement each other, just like men and women complement each other in ministry and in marriage. He says you have to have healthy rhythms of work and rest. And what our culture loves to do in our flesh is to try to take apart the things that God has put together, right? God says these two
Mm,
things belong together, and we say, okay, we become workaholics, or we're like leisure culture. We just want to rest, 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 rest. And so it's like, we'll work really hard for months, but we're going to Tahiti, right? For 2 weeks, we're going to live it up in Tahiti and live leisure. And his point is, when we live within the normal rhythms God gives us, we don't need such extremes. Like we won't become workaholics and we won't be leisureaholics either. We'll be able to say 6 days we work, 1 day we rest. 6 days we work, 1 day we rest. What that looks like for our family is we have some regular rhythms. We don't do spectacular things as our family, but we do small things regularly. We have regular things that my kids know to expect, and they help with the chaos of our lives and the changing nature of our lives in ministry, where things just change on a dime. Every Sunday after church is my Sabbath time. For 2-3 hours, I go away. My kids know it. Our neighborhood Starbucks knows it. People in our neighborhood know it. It's just, you'll find me at the exact same table, drinking the exact same drink for 2 hours, just meeting with the Lord. And that Sabbath time, the way I say it to women is, if you have a time where you can feast with the Lord, it's you and the Lord and you're feasting, that frees you to have weeks, the days during the week where you're just able to nibble. Like the kid throws up and your quiet time is gone, or the nap, the dog barks and the baby's nap is ruined and they're wanting your quiet time. If you have that regular time, it's like a date night with God where you're having extended time with him and you're connected and you know where you're in the scriptures and you know the truths that you're holding on to. Then life can happen. Of course, you want to still try to have your time with the Lord, but life happens. So feast versus nibble. So that's one of our regular family times.
That's
After church, we always do SIA bowls together, a quick, easy lunch because we're all tired after church. And then I go and do my Sabbath time.
that's
My husband and I have a Monday morning planning meeting where we look at our schedule and we look at our weeks and our priorities, just like an hour long. And I push against it. I don't like it, but it's so important when we do it. Every Tuesday, my little guy and I go get Yogurtland after school. It's 20 minutes, but it's every Tuesday. It's the same thing.
mm.
I'm trying to think of other family
That's
dinners are significant.
that
Um,
takes a lot of intentionality.
yeah.
And sometimes I think, and that's where the tension for me often comes, is I'm just letting life manage me instead of
Yes.
me managing my life.
Yes.
And so I don't spend the energy or time. And you know what? I've been trying to unpack this in myself just recently of why I resist sitting down and being intentional about my week. And it's because if I don't hit the mark, I feel like it's a failure.
Mm, yeah.
I don't like the scorecard that I can
Mm,
compete. And the Lord has just said, Amy, it's not a scorecard.
yes.
It is a goal to strive for, but with a lot of grace and flex in the middle of it. But I think that's one of the lies that I
Mm,
fall into thinking is, if I don't do this every single Monday morning or
yeah.
every single Tuesday or every single Sunday after church, then what's the point anyway?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's a lie.
Yeah. Well, and I think I remember reading in a parenting book years ago. Um, he said the point of structure is that not that we become rigid, but that we have a place that we return to when things get out of control. And so it's
Mm,
like it's not overly rigid or overly flexible.
mm.
It's a loose. The way I say it is, it's a loose swaddle. So
Oh, that's
like it's not like a straitjacket, but it's also not like a baby's arms just flailing. Like structure and routine are a loose swaddle. So
mm,
we kind of know what to expect. But I think
mm,
you're right. I think the all or nothing.
mm,
There's a saying that says that the enemy of the perfect is the good. The enemy of the good is the perfect, and
mhm.
that sometimes that we have this. If we can't get it right, if we can't get our family rhythms perfect, or what if a week veers off of our family routine? And I would say 2 out of 4 weeks where something is veering, something's shifted, but we know where to return to. Like we have a returning spot, and so
That's
we hold it loosely. But to your point of um, time will just sweep us into it. Like our culture, the patterns of our culture. It's like we live in San Diego, and so when you get in the water at the beach,
mm,
you're like you think you're right in front of your stuff. You are, and then you get out, 20 minutes later, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm a mile away from my chair. Like how? Because when you're in the water, you don't realize how much it's taking you, and
mm,
so I think that's part of why having regular rhythms of rest is so important, is because it's a chance to get out of the water and go, oh my goodness, look how far my heart and my mind have come. It kind of makes you go stop and reassess and say, where are we? Oh my goodness, sports just took over our week this week. That's what happened this week. Okay, back to the drawing board. I think we grow weary of like you said, the trying to create the system and then feeling like we failed at the system, rather than saying, this is just a structure that helps us return back to the Lord and reassess and reevaluate where we are.
Mm.
Um, and one of the another thing that my husband and I talk about a lot is the difference between like a quick pit stop and like a 200-point check on your car, right? So pit stop would be like the example of, if you watch NASCAR or something like that, they pull over, they do a quick 20-second tire change, which is insane because it takes me 20 seconds to figure out where I even pop my gas open every time I try to fill my car with gas. But they do that quick, like, oh, hurry up, quick, fix it, put it back on the road. And in life and ministry, there's just seasons where we're doing quick pit stops. It's like,
Mm.
okay, that kid's falling off the rails right now. Okay, quick pit stop. What does he need for this moment to make it to next week? Okay. And that's not bad. But if that's all you do, that's not healthy rhythms. To a 200-point car check is where they say, every 200,000 miles or whatever it is, you're supposed to bring your car in, get it off the road, let us jack it up into the air, look at all the parts and say, like, what's going on with your car?
Mm.
And so we need both. We need the quick pit stop moments of like, hey, quick family meeting. We're all having a moment right now. And you're
Yeah.
tired and you're grumpy and we've gone really hard this week. Let's do a quick pit stop. And regular times where we're actually like, nope, as a family, we're saying this is a rest weekend for our family. We're reevaluating rhythms. So we do this before summer starts. We have like a summer planning meeting, me and Gijo, my husband. We do two actually, like a brainstorming one, a realistic one, and then invite the kids in one. So it's actually 3 meetings. And just because I get really overwhelmed, I'm a structure person. If you can't tell, I like structures. And summer is so wide open. And
Yeah.
I think there's 2 kinds of moms. There's the moms who are like, yes, no structure,
Yes.
freedom. I'm so excited I can breathe. And the moms who are like, no structure, what are we going to do? And they're like really worried.
Yeah.
I fall into that category.
I know, it's so hard because I like the idea of having, yay, summertime. But then, oh my gosh, when there's no structure, it freaks me out. I feel so chaotic inside. And so
Yes,
I
yes.
think again, you're being intentional about your conversation and about your life in conversation with your husband and your family. I
Yeah.
think that's one of the missing parts because isn't it interesting that in ministry we have planning meetings, in ministry we have touch base ministries. I mean, not touch base, but we gather up our staff or our people and our lay leaders, and we have all these. But with our families, it's not one of the things that most of us tend to do. But for our dearest people to our hearts,
Mm-hmm.
it 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 is what needs to happen, especially as schedules get more fingered out. With the older that your kids get,
Yeah.
there's just it's all over the place, and it can make family life feel fractured. It can make ministry life feel fractured, and so I think that is such a sweet takeaway
Mm.
is a very practical one for those who are listening, ministry wives. If you don't have any kind of intentionality over your schedule with your family, begin to pray about what that could look like. Talk to your husband about what that could look like. He may not be a planner. You may be the planner. It may be you having to kind of bring him along into buy-in, but lay before the Lord first
Mm-hmm.
what it is that you can do to intentionally walk with your family through life stages and seasons of chaos and just the tension of living, like you
Mm.
mentioned earlier.
I say a few things about family meetings. One, um, lead with vision. Like we like start with the positive and the fun. Like we want this to be the most fun summer.
It's good.
We want to have plans. We want to have lots of free time built in, but we're also going to have some structures, and we're going to have our family devotions, and
Mm.
so lead with vision, lead with joy and hope. Um, Ask their opinions. It's amazing. Like our whole summer plan, we thought we had this. My husband and I had this great airtight plan, and then we presented it to the boys, and it was like, yeah, that's not going to work. That's not going to work. And they were right. Like I was just overly like, this is the plan. I just want a plan. Stick with it. And they poked holes in it and they were like, I don't think that sounds right. But this sounds good. And this sounds good. And what if we tried this? And what if we tried that? And so, and then giving them the freedom to help. So part of I think leading our children is helping them learn how to think intentionally for time and helping them learn healthy rhythms of work and rest. I'm not going to be in my kids' college dorm telling them, okay, you studied really hard, take a break, or you've been playing, Frisbee all day. Maybe you should start. So the goal is that they start to internalize some of these realities, and it's going to be nuanced. I think that's the challenge for me, is it's nuanced for each one of them. They rest differently than I rest.
Mm.
So now I'm managing 5 people's rest. Like, you rest by going on a bike ride. Well, you are an extrovert and you want to be with people. I'm an introvert. I don't want to see anybody on my Sabbath time.
Yeah.
How do we, so we give them like a goal sheet every summer, and we just say, hey, we're not going to tell you your goals. We're going to ask you your goals. And they have a couple sectors, and it comes from Luke, where it talked about Jesus growing in wisdom, stature, and fear of God, and in fear of man. And so those are the 4 categories we give our boys: wisdom, stature. So mind and intellect. Stature would be like physical health. Like, what are your physical goals for your sports, for your body, for eating, for drinking water, whatever. Wisdom, stature, fear of God, and fear of man. So fear of God would be spiritual life. And then fear of man would be like, just your emotional, relational life. Like, what are your goals with your friends? Who you're wanting to hang out with? And let them come up with some goals. And then we help to hold them accountable to their goals. And we can tweak them and say, oh, that seems a little unrealistic. Or so trying to lead them the way we would lead, like you said, the people at our church.
Mhm.
Um, and I don't want to give you this rosy picture, like there were tears at our last family meeting. There's so it's not this like, oh, we have this wonderful
Oh,
system, but
yeah.
the goal is communication and
Yes.
clarity of expectation. I think that's huge for our children. Is we have a quick devotion in the morning in the summers specifically, and then we have a quick like, okay, what are your expectations for the day? This is what mom needs to do. These are the hours in which she needs to do them. What do you need to do? So we're giving them right expectations. And even like we have 2 weeks. So for example, we have 2 weeks this summer, back-to-back ministry, and it's intense. We have a VBS base, well, it's a sports camp, an evangelistic sports camp that we're doing as a family and as a church. And then we back right into a medical mission trip to Tijuana, Mexico. That is 2 weeks of
Oh gosh.
near nonstop going and service.
Yeah.
And so we're preparing them with expectations. Okay, this is going to be an insane this is an example of burnout. Like, this looks like burnout. This sounds like a bad idea, but this is what God's calling us to do, and we're going to do it. And he's going to give us grace, and we're going to
Mm.
walk in wisdom. We're going to have lots more check-ins every day. How are we doing? What do we need? Do we need a break today? What do we need?
That's
Um,
good.
and we're going to have margin on either side. And we're going to say, okay, for these 2 weeks, we're rallying around mission, and we're going to do this. But I promise you, there's going to be 3 days on the front end and 3 days on the back end when we're just chilling. We're going to be together as a family. We're going to go eat the ice cream, and we're going to. So it's some of it's setting their expectations for what this is or isn't, or this is a busy day today, and here's what you can expect. What's one thing you need from me? How can
Mm.
we love you better today? Or this is what we need from you. Um, Today for all of our boys are very involved in our church, and so they all have real jobs, not like pretend jobs, like, oh, you just like legitimate, like you better show up or it's not going to happen kind of jobs. And that makes it's not just mom and dad's thing, ministry. This is our thing. Like, this is our thing that we do together,
Mm.
and that makes ministry, it's not attention, it's fun. Like, we're doing this together.
That's so good. I think that that conversation and then engaging them with goal setting at any point within the year. I mean, the beginning of school year in the fall, or in January at the beginning of the calendar year. There's just certain points that, if this is something, listener, that is just on your heart to go before the Lord with, and see if this is what He would have you do with your family. There's so many insert points for you with this, and just begin praying. So, with all the things that we've talked about, Aimee, and for that ministry wife who says, I don't know how to start,
Mm.
what would be the one step that, after turning this podcast off, instead of feeling overwhelmed with all the things that she's not doing, can't do, and really won't do, what's one thing that you would encourage her to do?
Yeah, I think the first thing for me, the biggest piece is starting to have some kind of rhythm of Sabbath rest with the Lord. Because to me, that's the one, it's Godward. This is about, and Sabbath rest isn't, it's a chance for you to be, you take off, I call it the gospel dressing room. You're taking off every other hat. You're not ministry wife. You're not, writer. You're not teacher. You're not, fill in the blank, community group leader. You are not mom even. You are daughter of the King. You're a child of God. And it's a gospel dressing room. It's a chance to get back to the basics of the gospel and say, this is who I am. Now, in light of who I am, what do you have for me this week? And I think when you have first things first, it's easier to tell, like I said earlier, that line between good, better, best. That, yeah, that's a good thing, but that's not God's best for me this week. And so I can say no to that. So I can say yes to him. And I would say also regular rhythms of just journaling. So part of overwhelm is we have like literally our brains aren't meant to hold that much information. And so, like sticky notes, that's been a thing in our family lately. I'm like, it's so funny to me. We have all this fancy technology, and sticky notes are the winner right now. We have sticky notes on doors, we have sticky notes on laptops, on computers, on
Yeah.
journals, because it's a way to have a place for information that's not all trying to be stored in your head. And the same thing with journaling. When we journal, it's releasing some of that information. It's actually rewiring where it goes in our brain. And so it's not like in the, oh, this is overwhelming. It's like, okay, no, I processed that with the Lord. I prayed through that. And that's what Sabbath does. It gives you a chance to do that, a time to slow down and say, what is, and that's how I do my Sabbath time. I dump out my heart and I say, Lord, these are all the things going on. And then I say, help me. And and give me scriptures and give me your truth, and then walk me into the next week. And every week, every single week he does, the only times when I leave my Sabbath disappointed are the times when I didn't really Sabbath. I was still checking my phone. That's my issue, not the Lord's. So I would say start with that, and just assess, where is your time going and why, like whose voice, because when it comes to scheduling, it's really about whose voice are you listening to.
That's so good.
Are you listening to the narrative that you think the other elders' wives are saying? Are you listening to the narrative of your congregants or of your neighbors down the street? Well, what would they say if I don't go to a baseball game? Well, I think they'll say they're not thinking about me. If I need to not go to a baseball game because I need to stay home and be still before the Lord, or stay home and clean my house, that's okay. Or if I need to not go to one day of VBS because what my children are melting down because it's too much for them, I'm going to say yes to the Lord. So that's John 10. My sheep hear my voice. They know me and they follow me. So I would start with that, meeting with the Lord, slowing down your heart and asking, whose voice am I listening to? And then recommitting to, I follow the Lord, and I save my yeses for him. So Mother Teresa's mom, which I just think it's fascinating, when she said she wanted to go and be a nun, her mom obviously didn't want her to be a nun. She didn't want her daughter to leave her and go to another place. It's not like today where you could just email them. And she processed it with the Lord. And then Mother Teresa said of her mother, she could never say no to Jesus. So what she can never say no to Jesus. So she said, okay, if this is what Jesus is telling you to do, you got to do it. I want that to be said of me. I don't want someone to say, oh, Aimee really managed her time well, or man, that house was spotless, which it's not. Or man, they did a great job in their marriage. I want to be known as someone who says yes to Christ. And yes to Christ often means no to other things. And that's okay. Like Jesus was limited. That's the thing that helps me when it comes to chaos and schedule and fullness is Jesus, who was in very nature God. He was fully God and fully man. He did not do everything. He had no sin. So it wasn't a sin issue that he didn't do that. He said he would go to some towns for a couple of days and then he would leave. He would heal some people, but not everyone. Because whose voice was Jesus listening to? He wasn't listening to the crowds. He wasn't listening to the Pharisees or the expectations that people put on him as the Messiah. He disappointed so many people.
That's so good.
But he did not disappoint the Father. He said, my will is to do the work of him who sent me. My food is his will. And so if that's going to be true of us, I think we're going to be free, or we're going to be radically free to be able to say no and disappoint people, sometimes even our own children, to do ministry, or to disappoint people in ministry to say yes to our children, because we're saying my goal is to follow my Father. And we won't know what he's calling us to do if we're so busy that we're not still. We can't listen to the Spirit. We can't listen to what he's guiding us into.
Gosh, that's so good, because I think of myself at seasons and different people in which I serve say, I just don't have time to take those 2 hours. And really, I would say to them, sweet friend, you don't have time not to. You
Mm-hmm.
don't. At what cost is not having that time affecting your family and your ministry and your relationship with the Lord? So so many wonderful things that I believe the Lord meandered our conversation in, and our prayer, listeners, is that the Lord will continue to kind of pepper your spirit and your heart with these words of truth and customize them specifically to what you need to hear in the busy chaos of what your ministry and family life look like.
Mm.
Well, Aimee, thank you so much for having this conversation with me and joining me here on the Ministry Wife podcast.
Thank you. It's been a joy to be with you.
Thanks so much for listening to the Ministry Wives podcast, a production of the North American Mission Board. If this conversation was helpful to you, please share it with a ministry wife friend. Also, you can subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform to make this content easier for others to find. And you can find this podcast and other helpful resources at ministrywivespodcast.com. And I'll see you here next week.